Night in Seoul fell, and powerful CEO Choi Ji-Hoon believed he was in absolute control of his life. Nothing seemed to escape his grasp. Million-dollar companies, market-moving decisions, and even the illusion of maintaining a secret romance with Lee Hye-jin, the lover he believed to be his true passion. When he received the news that she had suffered a serious accident and needed urgent care at the hospital, he didn't think twice. He rushed there, carrying a bouquet of expensive flowers, a symbol of his hidden devotion. For Ji-Hoon, that gesture was proof that he was willing to face any consequences for this parallel love. But fate, in its cruel irony, had prepared a scene far more powerful than any gift bought with wealth. As he walked through the hospital doors, through cold, hurried corridors, he had no idea that the true hero of that night had already sprung into action. Lee Hye-jin's life had been saved by an unexpected blood donation, made by someone who should never have been there, offering what was most precious to her without asking for anything in return. And when Ji-Hoon discovered the name engraved in the medical records, his heart was struck by a blow no negotiation could avoid. The woman who had saved his lover was his own wife, Mrs. Choi Ji-Hoon. From that moment on, the story ceases to be just about betrayal, flowers, and hidden secrets. It becomes a battleground between guilt, loyalty, and true love. How can a man who has always believed in power deal with the revelation that the wife he scorned, silent and forgotten amidst luxury, was responsible for keeping alive the woman who threatened to destroy his marriage? Brace yourself, because this isn't just a tale of infidelity, it's the naked exposure of a divided heart, a wounded marriage that still throbs, and choices that will forever change the fate of three intertwined lives. If you want to follow every twist and turn of this story until the end, subscribe to the channel now and leave your like to support our work. Before arriving at that hospital, the life of Choi Ji-Hoon and Kang Soo-Min had followed a path that to others seemed flawless. They met as young men inside the quiet library of Seoul National University when both were pursuing different but equally intense dreams. Ji-Hoon was studying business with fierce ambition, determined to build an empire that would carry his name to the top. Soo-Min was devoted to traditional music, enamored with the melancholic sound of the gyeogum, believing that art could transform lives. While he devised strategies to dominate the market, she dreamed of transmitting beauty through the strings of her instrument. In the beginning, there was love. Ji-Hoon was enchanted by her sweetness, by the delicate way she saw the world, as if even life's pains could be healed by gentle melodies. Soo-Min, in turn, admired his strength, believing his determination could protect them from any adversity. The wedding was celebrated with pomp, surrounded by family, friends, and the local press, who saw the couple as the perfect blend of tradition and modernity. At the time, no one doubted they were made for each other. As the years passed, however, the balance of their relationship began to tip unevenly. Ji-Hoon immersed himself obsessively in his work, building the largest construction company in Seoul. Endless meetings, business trips, and corporate dinners became his routine. Soo-Min, relegated to the role of discreet wife, watched this process silently. She supported him in everything, organizing family events, taking care of his health, accompanying him to galas, but always remained in the background, like a shadow that served to give the protagonist of the story a shine. There were nights when she waited for him with the table set and her heart anxious, but the chair beside her remained empty, occupied only by the distant sound of her phone notifications. Other times, she accompanied him to grand dinners, but found herself ignored amidst the executives and actresses hired to entertain. Gradually, the love that once lit Ji-Hoon's gaze turned to indifference, as if her presence were merely part of the luxurious decor of his public life. Despite this, Soo-Min continued to believe. She believed that one day he would remember how essential she had been to his journey, that he would realize how much she had sacrificed her own artistic career to support him through difficult times. But her every gesture seemed to fall into an echoless abyss. The marriage, which had begun as a pact of shared dreams, now became a cold stage where only one voice struggled to keep the melody alive. And while she persisted, still clinging to the hope that his eyes would see her again as before, external forces were already moving to transform that distance into an irreparable abyss. For in that same corporate environment that fueled his vanity, Ji-Hoon would find something he believed to be passion, but which in reality would be the beginning of his destruction. It was within the glass corridors of the company's headquarters, amidst voluminous reports and endless meetings, that Lee Hae-jin emerged like a silent storm. Young, charismatic, and ambitious, she held a modest position in the marketing department, but her calculating gaze revealed she aspired to much more than spreadsheets and presentations. To her colleagues, she was simply a dedicated employee. To Ji-Hoon, however, she became a breath of fresh air. Amidst the predictable routine of his life, the first approach was subtle. A discreet compliment during a meeting, a coffee delivered at the right time, a seemingly innocent smile as he concluded a pitch to investors. Hae-jin knew exactly how to act. She offered no resistance, but neither did she surrender immediately. She made herself desired with the precision of someone who understands that patience is the sharpest weapon. Ji-Hoon, accustomed to receiving automatic respect, found in that veiled boldness a boost that massaged his ego. As the months passed, Hae-jin's presence began to infiltrate the CEO's daily routine. Calls at inappropriate times, long conversations in empty hallways, business trips that suddenly required her company. What was once mere sympathy turned into complicity, and soon after into something that surpassed the limits of what was acceptable. The relationship with Soo-Min, already weakened by emotional absence, began to unravel like old fabric slowly. Tearing, Soo-Min noticed the changes. It wasn't just the hours that stretched on without explanation, but also the cold gestures, the distant looks, and the way Ji-Hoon avoided any closeness. In the rare moments they were at the table, the silence was heavier than any discussion. When she tried to make conversation, he cut her off with short sentences, accusing her of being paranoid. Every attempt at dialogue was transformed into veiled humiliation, as if the problem lay with her, not the increasingly evident distance between them. The city of Seoul, which had so often been the setting for their shared dreams, now bore witness to their betrayal. At corporate dinners, Hae-jin's presence became ever more prominent, always discreet enough not to arouse public suspicion, yet bold enough for Soo-Min to feel her shadow. The wife who had once shone as a partner was now treated as a faded accessory, a replaceable piece on the board Ji-Hoon believed he dominated. Still, no one imagined that this risky game would soon turn into a wound exposed for all to see, because there were dates that could not be forgotten, and there were gestures that meant more than words. On a night meant to celebrate one of the most important bonds in their lives, the truth would begin to reveal itself cruelly, leaving scars that could never be erased. The wedding anniversary of Choi, Ji-Hoon and Kang Soo-Min should have been a night of celebration. For weeks, Soo-Min had planned every detail, believing that perhaps this day would bring back a bit of the man she'd known in her youth. She'd ordered a simple cake from a traditional bakery near Insadong, bought fresh flowers at the local market, and set the table with the same care she'd used when they were just two dreamy students, her heart beat with a fragile hope, sustained by the desire that, at least on this day, Ji-Hoon would remember who had always been by his side. But the chair in front of her remained empty. Hours ticked by, and the clock seemed to mock her weight. Her phone rang once, but not to announce her delay or apologize. It was just a notification from a social media platform where the image that appeared on the screen would turn her night into a nightmare. There was Ji-Hoon, impeccably dressed, raising a glass of wine in a luxurious Gangnam restaurant. Beside him, in a shimmering dress, was Lee Hye-jin, smiling as if he had conquered the world. The caption written by the CEO himself simply said, "To true happiness, a toast." The words struck Soo-Min like invisible blades. Her eyes welled up, but she no longer had the strength to cry. She sat at the carefully set table, blew out the candles on the cake herself, and silently tasted a bitter bite of the dessert that was supposed to symbolize love. Each bite was a mixture of pain and humiliation, as if her own dignity had been served alongside that empty dinner. Meanwhile, Ji-Hoon continued his evening as if nothing else mattered. The restaurant's soft music lulled fake smiles and fleeting toasts, but behind that luxurious facade, fate was already preparing to intervene. Hours later, as the illicit couple left the restaurant heading to their car, an accident changed their route for the evening. The vehicle Hye-jin was in lost control while swerving to avoid another car and collided violently on a curve. The metallic sound echoed through the wet streets of Gangnam, and within minutes, ambulances broke the early morning silence, rushing the young woman to the hospital. The news spread quickly. Ji-Hoon, desperate, immediately rushed to the scene, seized by a panic he had never displayed, even when his wife had faced health problems in the past. In the hospital corridors, his expression betrayed genuine concern, but not for the woman who had given him years of life, but for the lover he had recently met. In a hurry, he bought expensive flowers from a shop that was still open, believing this grand gesture would demonstrate his devotion. Meanwhile, Soo-Min learned of the tragedy indirectly, through garbled messages circulating among acquaintances, and it was at that moment that fate's cruel twist was revealed. Hye-jin urgently needed a rare blood transfusion, and the hospital bank didn't have enough. Soo-Min's heart sank at the news. Was it right to save the life of the woman who had stolen not only her husband, but also her peace? The decision consumed her, but the answer came from within. Even though she was hurt, even though she was humiliated, she couldn't ignore a life that depended on her help. Without announcing her presence, without demanding recognition, she made her way to the hospital. Dressed in simple clothes, she was almost invisible amidst the rush of the hallways. She signed the papers, lay down on the stretcher, and with her eyes fixed on the white ceiling, let her blood flow through her veins toward the bag that would save her rival. She didn't cry, didn't smile, didn't say a word. She simply gave. Part of herself as a final gesture of compassion, knowing she would never be remembered. Ji-Hoon, however, remained oblivious to the truth. In his hands, the bouquet of red roses was a symbol of the twisted devotion he displayed to the world. As he climbed the hospital floors to find Hye-jin, he believed he was fulfilling his role as a man in love. What he could never have imagined was that, in that very building, his wife had just offered him the greatest proof of her love, and perhaps her last. On that cold morning, while doctors raced against time to stabilize the life of Lee Hye-jin, Kang Soo-Min left the donation room with slow steps and a lost look in her eyes. Her body was frail, but it was her soul that carried the unbearable weight of an invisible wound. The white corridor seemed endless, as if every meter were a painful reminder of what she had just done, saving her husband's lover. It was a cruel irony, almost unbearable, but she bore it in silence, as she had done during all the years she had sacrificed herself to keep that marriage together. She sat for a few moments on a metal bench near the hospital's side exit. A feeling of emptiness enveloped her. She remembered the first time she had held Ji-Hoon's hands as a young woman on the university campus, when she had believed that love meant protection, complicity, and respect. Now, as she leaned her head against the cold wall, she realized she was alone, more alone than she had ever imagined. While he rushed to his lover with a luxurious bouquet, she let her own blood flow silently for someone who had hurt her without ever even looking her in the eye. Tears emerged, not in loud bursts, but in silent streams that ran down her pale cheeks. The suppressed sobs felt heavier than screams. They mourned the life she had chosen, the love she had sacrificed, the dignity she had slowly lost, trying to be enough for a man who no longer saw her. Yet, amid the pain, a new clarity was emerging. It hurt more than any physical wound, but it also pointed to an inescapable truth. Nothing she could do would change Ji-Hoon's coldness. Hours passed, and she returned home even more exhausted, walking through the silent streets of Seoul, lit only by solitary streetlights. Upon entering, she found the table still set, the cake untouched, the flowers she had bought for herself now wilted in a vase. Every detail of the scene was a cruel reminder of the loneliness she lived in. She sank onto the sofa, hugging herself, as if seeking comfort where there was no one to offer. In the days that followed, Soo-Min seemed to walk in a fog. He barely ate, avoided answering phone calls, and kept his distance even from close relatives. His body felt the impact of donating blood, but it was his mind that bore the brunt of it, the certainty that he had hit rock bottom. With each news of Hyejin's recovery, delivered with genuine concern by Ji-Hoon, his heart shattered a little more. The man to whom he had given everything was now publicly dedicating himself to another, and no one would ever know that behind that recovery lay his wife's silent sacrifice. It was during this period that she began to realize there was nothing more to expect from him. The pain, paradoxically, began to turn into fuel. If before I had believed silence was merely submission, now I saw it as a form of liberation. I no longer needed to beg for attention, nor compete with a lover to prove my worth. The blood I had given was the last drop of a love that had faded with dignity, and so, between tears and suppressed sighs, Soo-Min took the first step toward emotionally detaching herself from Ji-Hoon. It wasn't an immediate break, but a silent decision that would stay with her from then on. The same silence that once made her disappear before his eyes would now be the weapon that would restore her life. After the night he left part of himself in that hospital, Kang Soo-Min appeared discreetly from the routine of Choi Ji-Hoon. There were no discussions, no official goodbyes. She simply withdrew from a space that had never truly belonged to her. Without fanfare, she stopped attending company social events, accepting dinner invitations, and even maintaining the impeccable appearance required of the position of wife to a major CEO. To the world, she merely seemed withdrawn. But deep inside, the decision had been made. She would no longer live in the shadow of a man who had never known how to recognize her. With the little energy she had left, Soo-Min sought refuge in something that had always been her essence, music. She walked again through the historic alleys of Insadong, where traditional shops, red lanterns, and tea houses still preserved the ancient spirit of Korea. There, among hanging instruments and cultural schools, she found a chance to start over. She agreed to teach gayagayam lessons to curious young people and tourists, enchanted by the tradition. And each note drawn from the strings was like a breath of life that filled the void within her. Gradually, her appearance changed. Her haggard expression gave way to a discreet gleam in her eyes, the result not of great achievements, but of the quiet freedom she discovered in dedicating herself to herself. She no longer wore the designer clothes Ji-Hoon demanded. She preferred simple fabrics, modern hanboks that blended tradition and lightness. She went unnoticed in the Seoul crowd, but it was precisely in this anonymity that she found her strength again. Meanwhile, Ji-Hoon barely noticed her absence. He believed his wife's silence was just another phase of submission, like so many other times. He continued to flaunt Hye-jin in private circles, completely unaware that even as he celebrated his conquest, his wife was no longer part of that universe. What he didn't know was that while his life became entangled in luxury and lies, Soo-Min was building a solid and independent path where there was no room for his shadow. And so, with each lesson, with each shared melody, she grew stronger. She didn't need public recognition or validation from those who had once despised her. The silence that had once represented pain now became a shield, and within it, Soo-Min discovered a new version of herself, stronger, freer, more ineradicable. But even as she quietly blossomed, Ji-Hoon's world began to crack in unseen places. The blind trust he had placed in his lover would be the beginning of a slow and inevitable ruin, and he still had no idea what price he would have to pay. While Kang Soo-Min rebuilt his life in silence, far from the spotlight and social masks, the universe of Choi Ji-Hoon was beginning to show signs of instability. The man who once strode with firm steps through the luxurious halls of Seoul no longer carried the same luster of authority. At first, there were only minor missteps: a delayed contract, an investor who backed out, a negative article in a business newspaper. Ji-Hoon, with his unshakable pride, treated everything as if they were fleeting incidents, unable to see that his arrogance had opened dangerous rifts within the company itself. The root of the problem had a name and a face. Lee Hee-jin, the once sweet and charming lover, now displayed a more calculating and ruthless side. She used her proximity to the CEO to influence strategic decisions, discreetly embezzled funds, and fueled internal rivalries between directors. What Ji-Hoon believed to be genuine passion turned into a dangerous game of manipulation, in which he was just another pawn. The company's corridors, once dominated by his commanding charisma, now buzzed with whispers of the imminent fall of his empire. Newspaper headlines began to repeat themselves with alarming frequency. Choi construction in crisis, foreign investors withdraw support, management questioned after rumors of internal scandal. The name he had been so proud to see plastered across the face of success was now associated with failure and distrust. Invitations to business dinners dwindled, praise at conferences vanished, and little by little, the pedestal he had always placed himself on crumbled before his eyes. Ji-Hoon tried to keep up appearances. He continued to arrive in luxurious cars, wearing impeccable suits and flashing calculated smiles. But in his moments of solitude, inside his office overlooking the Han River, he could already feel the weight of defeat approaching. He wouldn't admit it out loud, but he knew he'd lost control. And, even more cruel, he realized that, in Soo-Min's absence, there was no one to support him emotionally. The woman who had once been ready to offer him balance was no longer part of his universe, and it was precisely this absence that left the void so great, impossible to fill. While Ji-Hoon's empire faltered, Soo-Min remained steadfast on her new path. Her classes in Insadong grew in number, and her presence became recognized as a symbol of cultural revival. She flourished quietly without fanfare, while he crumbled in public. The contrast between the two became stark. On one side, a man surrounded by luxury who no longer possessed anything solid. On the other, a simple woman rediscovering her worth and rebuilding her identity. And it was in this scenario of impending doom that fate arranged their reunion. An unexpected event would bring their paths closer together, bringing the arrogant CEO and the woman he believed he had forgotten face to face. But what Ji-Hoon would encounter at that moment was not the submissive wife he once was, but a transformed version, capable of showing that silence could also be the most lethal weapon. A few weeks after rumors of a crisis began to erode the construction company's image, An unexpected invitation arrived at the table. Choi Ji-Hoon's Severance Hospital in Seoul was holding a ceremony to thank blood donors who had helped save lives in critical situations. To him, the event seemed insignificant, a detail too small to occupy a CEO's schedule. Still, pressured by image consultants who insisted on smoothing over the storm brewing over his reputation, he decided to attend. He had no idea that night his life would be struck by an indescribable shock. The auditorium was packed with doctors, recovered patients, and ordinary citizens who had become unsung heroes. Amid moving speeches and subdued applause, stories of courage were shared on stage. Ji-Hoon, seated in the front rows, maintained the same arrogant expression. But inside he felt out of place, as if the room didn't belong to him. He watched the emotional crowd, unable to comprehend how anyone could find greatness in such discreet gestures. It was then that the MC announced the arrival of a special donor. A woman had saved the life of a critically ill patient thanks to a rare blood transfusion. The audience rose to their feet in respectful applause, and Ji-Hoon, impatient, simply looked away until he recognized the figure walking toward the stage. His heart raced. The world seemed to stop for a moment. There it was, Kang Soo-Min, his wife, wearing a modern hanbok in soft tones, with her hair tied up simply and a serene look. The surprise hit him like a blow. He, who had believed Soo-Min remained invisible in her daily routine, now saw her in the spotlight, receiving honors in front of dozens of people. The revelation left him breathless. The life of Hye-jin, the lover he had tried to protect at all costs, had been saved by his wife's silent blood. The bouquet of roses, the grand gestures, all the symbols of his false devotion, crumbled before that crushing truth. As Soo-Min quietly thanked him into the microphone without even mentioning it, Ji-Hoon felt the weight of shame wash over his posture. His body remained seated, but inside he was already on his knees. Her silence spoke louder than any speech. There were no accusations, no tears, just proof that, even though scorned, she still possessed the greatness to save. That night, he realized the distance between them was irreversible. For the first time, Ji-Hoon saw himself not as the center of attention, but as a small man before the strength of a woman he should never have underestimated. Their reunion didn't end on stage. When their eyes finally met, something in his chest broke. He tried to move forward, but was held back by the solemnity of the moment. And, as he applauded with trembling hands, he knew he had to reach her at any cost. What he didn't know was that, in trying to get closer, he would discover that not all doors remain open forever. The morning after the event, Choi Ji-Hoon could not ignore the restlessness that consumed him. The image of Kang Soo-Min on stage, receiving silent applause for having saved his lover's life, remained etched in his mind like an open wound. For the first time in years, he felt shame, not before shareholders or investors, but before his own wife. The weight of everything he had neglected, the humiliations and years of contempt, fell upon him like an unstoppable avalanche. He decided to seek her out, convinced that he could still regain what he had lost. In the late afternoon, Ji-Hoon appeared in Insadong, guided by discreet information about where Soo-Min was teaching music. The soft sound of the gyeogyum echoed through the small wooden room, filling the air with a melody that blended nostalgia and freedom. He stopped before the half-open door and watched in silence as she taught children, smiling serenely, so different from the dull woman he remembered. In that moment, he felt like an intruder in a life that no longer belonged to him. Still, he entered. In his hands, he carried a bouquet of flowers, once again trying to replace years of neglect with superficial gestures. When the children left, he approached with hesitant steps. "Soo-Min, I was wrong. I didn't realize how important you were to me." Forgive me." The words came out shaky, but filled with desperation. He spoke of sleepless nights, of the loneliness he was beginning to feel without her, of a regret that seemed to eat away at him. Soo-Min, however, was unfazed. She looked at him steadily, without tears, without hatred, only with the clarity of someone no longer trapped in the past. "Flowers?" she replied, her voice low but sharp. "I already gave them to you in silence when I donated my blood. But now I no longer bloom for you." The sentence fell like a sentence, ending any possibility of return. Ji-Hoon insisted, trying to hold her hands, but she pulled away. "You had your chance, Ji-Hoon, and you chose someone else's fleeting glow over the light that was always by your side. What's left of us is in the past, and there it will remain." Every word was a closed door, every gesture a wall impossible to cross. He left the room, his heart in pieces, but still unable to accept the end. Deep inside, he believed that time could ease her pain, that his persistence would one day find a way out. What he didn't know was that Soo-Min was already walking a different path, one where he would no longer be the protagonist. And as he sank into regret, the corporate world began to exact debts that could not be paid with apologies or flowers. Time passed, and the distance between Kang, Soo-Min and Choi Ji-Hoon became increasingly irreversible. While he tried in vain to mend their broken ties, she consolidated a new path, one of serenity and recognition. The Seoul Metropolitan Government, impressed by her dedication to teaching and preserving traditional music, invited her to work as a consultant on cultural projects. Soo-Min began collaborating on the restoration of historic palaces, bringing her artistic sensibility to places where Korea's memory intertwined with modernity. Each presentation in which she spoke about the importance of tradition was met with respect. She was no longer seen as the invisible wife of a prominent CEO, but as an independent woman, valued for her own uniqueness. Meanwhile, Ji-Hoon was immersed in growing trouble. Reports of irregularities began to surface, contracts evaporated in the face of investor distrust, and his name, once a symbol of power, became synonymous with scandal. To lover Lee Hee-jin, who had once promised him loyalty, was now being investigated for fraud and illicit enrichment. Evidence was mounting, revealing that much of the company's embezzlement had passed through his hands. A stunned Ji-Hoon found himself alone in empty meeting rooms, abandoned by directors who preferred to distance themselves from the impending downfall. The empire he had built over years had crumbled in a matter of months, and there was no one willing to lend a hand. The irony was relentless. While Soo-Min rose silently, without needing to take explicit revenge, Ji-Hoon reaped the consequences of his choices. Her true revenge was not the result of schemes or traps, but of the class with which she moved forward. By denying him forgiveness, by rising as an independent woman, she had condemned him to the most painful ruin, watching her success while he sank alone. In the corridors of Insadong, Soo-Min walked serenely, greeted by students and colleagues. Meanwhile, Ji-Hoon, in the hallways of his own company, encountered only disapproving looks and closing doors. The contrast was cruel, but fair. He would learn the hard way that silence, when filled with dignity, could be more devastating than any scream. And as Soo-Min's life continued to soar, he would still face the unbearable weight of looking back and realizing that none of it could be recovered, because the final ruin still lurked, ready to crush what remained of his pride. The office of Choi Ji-Hoon, which had once bustled with meetings and incessant phone calls, now seemed like a silent mausoleum. The heavy curtains could not hide the view of the Ryohan, whose waters reflected the bustling city lights, reminding him that the world continued to turn even without his imposing presence. Sitting in the leather armchair, he stared at the empty desk, where million-dollar contracts no longer rested, replaced by stacks of court notices and bankruptcy reports. The silence in the room was not just an absence of sound, but a cruel mirror of his own solitude. Among the scattered papers, he found a small wooden box, forgotten in one of the drawers. Inside it was an old tape recording of Soo-Min playing Gaya-geum during his university years. He inserted the tape into the dusty player, and suddenly the sound of strings filled the space, bringing with it memories he had long tried to erase. The gentle melody pierced him like an invisible blade. Each note carried not only the beauty of the music, but also the memory of what he had lost forever. Images flashed through his mind, her smiles as she prepared simple meals, her hopeful eyes on the nights she waited for him, the invitations she'd gently declined, concealing their hurt. He realized now that every gesture, every sacrifice, had been a silent proof of the love he'd scorned. He felt crushed, not by financial ruin, but by the emptiness of knowing that the only person who had truly been there for him would never return. He tried to imagine what it would be like to meet her again, what it would be like to hold her hands and promise to change, but the melody itself reminded him that that future no longer existed. Soo-Min had moved on, flourishing in a world where he no longer had a place. The humiliation he felt came not from the press, nor from investors, but from the realization that his most painful downfall had been losing the woman who had transformed pain into strength. And yet, there was still one final chapter to be written. Because while Ji-Hoon drowned in memories and regrets, Soo-Min's life was moving toward a symbolic conclusion, one that would forever mark the difference between those who allow themselves to be consumed by the past and those who find the strength to never look back. The streets of Insadong were lit by colorful lanterns that swayed gently in the night wind, between tourists admiring the traditional art displays and residents walking hurriedly. Kang Soo-Min, she walked calmly, as if each step were a silent affirmation of freedom. She wore a modern hanbok in shades of blue and white, simple yet imposing, and the discreet gleam in her eyes showed that no shadow could extinguish her light. The music of the Gaya-geum echoed from a small cultural hall down the street, blending into the scenery as if it were the soundtrack to her own reborn life. There was no longer room for regret in her heart. The silence that had once signified submission now represented power. She needed no fiery speeches to prove her strength, nor confrontations to reaffirm her dignity. Her revenge was consummated in the serenity with which she had rebuilt her life, in the certainty that she was no longer a prisoner of a painful past. As she walked, she remembered the night in the hospital, the silent gesture of donating blood, and smiled to herself. That had been the last gift she had given, without expecting anything in return. In another part of the city, Choi Ji-Hoon, he faced his own loneliness. The man he believed untouchable was now just a bitter memory of an empire in ruins. With every news of bankruptcy, with every disapproving look, he was forced to face the absence of those who truly mattered. And he knew, deep down, that he would never again hear the sound of the Gaya-geum played by the hands of the woman he had scorned. This was the price of arrogance, losing not only the company but the only chance at redemption. Fate, however, allowed no turning back. Soo-Min didn't look back, because she no longer belonged where she had been. The city, with all its grandeur, now welcomed her as a free, strong, and independent woman. And her walk through Insadong, under the soft light of the lanterns, was living proof that self-love can blossom even after the greatest pain. The narration ended with an indisputable truth. Those who donate blood can save a life, but those who donate love without respect choose never to return. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now and stay tuned for our next exciting stories. Like, share this video, and stay tuned because the next story will surprise you even more.